The colony of Arcanes was a quiet world, far from the center of the galaxy. It was a place the Empire barely remembered, a small planet with simple people. Farmers, miners, and children who lived under the shadow of alien rulers. The Empire had taken their resources, their freedom, and even their pride. But something strange had begun to stir in the air. It started as whispers, rumors that spread from one village to the next. A young man was said to have lifted a broken machine that 10 workers could not move. A wounded woman healed in one night from injuries that should have left her crippled. Children were born with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. The whispers grew louder, and fear grew with them. The Empire garrison on Arcanes dismissed the talk. Superstition, they said, laughing at the humans. The alien commander boasted that humans were weak, primitive, and easy to control. But the soldiers who patrolled the villages began to notice things they could not explain. Their scanners showed strange energy surges where humans gathered. Some weapons refused to fire when pointed at the villagers, as if unseen hands stopped them. One night, a squad of soldiers disappeared in the forest. Only one returned, his eyes wide, his body shaking. He whispered to his commander, "They are not human anymore." The commander struck him for cowardice, but deep inside, even he felt a chill. The people of Arcanes had suffered for generations. They had been mocked, enslaved, and treated as nothing. Yet now, power was awakening inside them. It was not learned. It was not given by machines or science. It was rising from within. An old teacher in the capital felt it first in his bones. He stood before his class and saw the air shimmer when he raised his hand. Books lifted from the shelves and floated in silence. The children gasped, but none ran away. Instead, they smiled as if they had always known this day would come. In another village, a miner trapped under stone was pulled free by his own strength. He had no machines, no tools, only his hands that crushed the rock like clay. When he walked into the sunlight, the people bowed, not in fear, but in awe. The whispers spread across the stars, carried by traders and smugglers. "They are changing," they said. "Humans are becoming something else." The Empire's listening posts recorded the rumors and sent them to the Senate. The reports were laughed at, dismissed as stories told by frightened colonists. But deep within the archives, one scholar remembered old warnings. He wrote in his secret notes, "This is the beginning of the rise of mankind." Back on Arcanes, the people no longer feared the soldiers. When an alien officer tried to strike a child, his hand froze in the air. No force field, no machine, just the will of the boy who stared at him. The officer screamed in rage, but his blaster melted in his grip. The crowd was silent, their hearts pounding with a single thought. We are not powerless anymore. Night after night, more humans awakened. Some could hear thoughts, some could see the future. Others bent metal, healed wounds, or walked unharmed through fire. No two powers were the same, but all carried the same truth. The age of weakness was over. The Empire commander ordered reinforcements. He spoke bravely, but his hands trembled as he sent the message. "What if the rumors are true?" one of his officers asked. The commander snarled, "Then we burn the planet." But in the darkness of the stars, the Empire was already too late. For in the hearts of humans, a fire had been lit. It was not just strength, not just power, it was the will to rise. They had been broken for centuries, but now they were becoming something the galaxy had never seen. Something godlike, something unstoppable. The whisper of power was no longer just a rumor. It was the sound of humanity awakening, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The whispers had spread too far. Across the galaxy, traders, spies, and refugees carried the same story. Humans on the colony of Arcanes were changing, becoming stronger, faster, untouchable. The Empire had ignored the first reports, but now even the Senate could not look away. The alien rulers mocked humans for centuries. They called them weak tools, slaves useful only for labor. But fear was creeping into their voices. If even a fraction of the rumors were true, then humanity was no longer harmless. The emperor himself ordered a fleet to Arcanis, not a grand armada, but a lesson force, meant to crush the colony and silence the talk. 5 warships, escorted by smaller cruisers, slipped through the blackness of space. Their commanders laughed, confident this mission would be easy. One officer joked, "We will put the humans back in chains before the week ends." But deep inside, the crews felt uneasy. The silence of the stars around Arcanis was heavy, as if waiting. On the surface, the people of the colony watched the skies. Children pointed as bright trails of fire cut through the heavens. The old teacher whispered, "They are coming." But the villagers did not run. They stood together, eyes glowing faintly in the dusk, their hearts steady. When the fleet descended, the Empire broadcasted a warning. "This planet belongs to the Empire. Surrender your rebels, or we will reduce your world to ash." The humans listened, but no one moved. Instead, one young woman stepped forward, her voice calm. "This world belongs to no empire. It belongs to us." The commander sneered and gave the order. Cannons lit the skies, sending beams of plasma into the villages. But something impossible happened. The fire never touched the ground. The beams stopped mid-air, frozen like glass in the sky. Then, with a sound like cracking thunder, the energy bent backward. The Empire's ships shook as their own blasts were hurled back upon them. The first cruiser exploded in a storm of fire. Panic spread through the fleet. "Impossible!" the commander shouted, slamming his fists. But on the ground, humans raised their hands, their eyes blazing. Some pulled the warships down with invisible force. Others tore apart metal with nothing but their will. Children lifted falling debris and set it gently aside as if the battle was nothing more than a game. The surviving soldiers on the ground tried to fight. They fired rifles, launched grenades, and screamed war cries. But every weapon failed. Blasters melted in their hands, bullets turned to dust, and grenades fizzled like harmless sparks. The soldiers fell to their knees, not from wounds, but from fear. One soldier dropped his gun and whispered, "They are gods." Another tried to run, but the ground itself rose like a wave and knocked him down. The villagers did not kill them. They only stood, watching with cold eyes. It was not hatred, it was justice. High above, the commander realized too late what he had unleashed. "This is not war," he muttered, sweat pouring down his face. "This is extinction for us." Before he could escape, his flagship split apart, torn by unseen hands. The wreckage burned across the night sky, a falling star that marked the end of arrogance. For the first time in centuries, humans were not the hunted. They were not the weak, not the forgotten. They were the storm. The Empire had come to teach them a lesson. But instead, the galaxy learned the truth. Humanity could no longer be contained. That night, the survivors of the battle sent desperate messages back to the Senate. Their words were broken, filled with fear. "They are unstoppable. They destroyed us with nothing but thought. The signal ended in static. The Senate chamber fell into silence when the report was read. None dared laugh this time. On Arcanis, the people stood among the ruins of ships and fire. The young woman who had spoken earlier looked at the stars. Her voice was quiet but filled with power. "They will come again," she said, "and when they do, we will be ready." The first clash was over. The Empire had failed, but this was only the beginning. The whisper of power had become a roar, and the galaxy trembled at the rise of godlike humans. The Senate chamber of the Empire was carved from stone older than memory. Its walls were covered with banners of conquered worlds. Here, rulers had gathered for centuries to boast of victories and plan more wars. But now, for the first time in 1,000 years, the chamber was silent. The report from Arcanis lay on the table. Fragments of broken transmissions, cries for help, and the sound of explosions. The last words echoed in every ear. "They're unstoppable." The senators stared at one another, their faces pale and stiff. No one laughed this time. No one dared to call the rumors superstition. The Empire had fought countless enemies, machines, beasts, and ancient rival species. But this was different. Humans were not outsiders, not invaders from another galaxy. They were subjects, slaves, dismissed as weak and insignificant. And now, those same humans had torn warships apart with nothing but willpower. The Emperor's throne sat in shadow. His voice was low and sharp. We cannot allow this infection to spread. He called humans an infection, a disease that had to be destroyed. But his words did not carry the same confidence they once had. Even he felt the chill of fear. Across the chamber, alien rulers whispered among themselves. If humans are rising, what happens when others follow them? They were nothing, and now they fight like gods. What if their power grows? Panic seeped into every corner of the Senate. Some called for immediate extermination. Others whispered of diplomacy, though none dared speak it loudly. To treat humans as equals was unthinkable. Yet the thought now lingered like smoke. In secret halls beyond the chamber, generals studied the battle logs. What little data survived was terrifying. Weapons had failed without reason. Shields had collapsed as if drained by invisible hands. Soldiers described fire hanging frozen in the air. They spoke of eyes glowing like stars and voices that bent metal. The generals argued. This cannot be science, one said. It is something older, something the galaxy has forgotten, another replied. The words they dared not say were simple, godlike. Meanwhile, fear spread far beyond the Senate walls. Merchants whispered in marketplaces. Smugglers spoke in hushed tones in the shadows of spaceports. Even slaves dared to hope. If humans can rise, perhaps we can too, they said. The idea was more dangerous than any weapon. The idea that power could belong to the weak. The Empire's propaganda machines worked endlessly. They broadcasted lies across the stars. The rebellion is small. The humans of Arcanes are already crushed. But the truth always slipped through. Traders carried stories of warships falling from the sky. Refugees spoke of children holding back fire with their hands. No lie could bury the fear now. In his private chambers, the Emperor walked alone. He stared out at the stars. Every world, every system he saw now seemed fragile. What if the humans spread their power to other colonies? What if the galaxy turned against him? For the first time in his reign, the Emperor felt small. Back on Arcanes, the humans felt the weight of what they had done. They had defeated a fleet, but they knew the Empire would return. They knew stronger armies and larger weapons would come. The young woman who had stood before the commander whispered to her people, "This is not victory. It is the beginning of a storm." But in her voice there was no fear, only resolve. Far away, in the hidden corners of the galaxy, ancient beings stirred. They had watched humanity for centuries, waiting. They spoke in voices that echoed across time. The children of Earth are awakening. They said, the balance of power is shifting. The Empire prepared for war. The Senate ordered new fleets. The generals drew up plans of fire and death. But behind their bravado was one truth they could not escape. Fear, deep and unshakable, had entered their hearts. And fear is the first step toward defeat. The galaxy was changing. The humans of Arcanes had shown a glimpse of what was coming. No force, no weapon, no empire could turn it back. The rise of humanity had begun. And in the vast silence of space, every world waited to see what would come next. On the colony of Arcanes, dawn broke with a strange silence. The smoke of the destroyed fleet still drifted across the skies. The villagers stood among broken metal and ash. Yet there was no despair in their eyes, only wonder. Something was happening to them, something far greater than survival. It began slowly, at first a spark, a flicker, but now it spread like fire through every man, woman, and child. The awakening had begun. A miner woke before sunrise and felt his strength surge. His hands crushed stone as if it were clay. He laughed in disbelief, then fell to his knees. Not out of fear, but out of awe. In the capital, an old teacher who once lifted books in the classroom now stood before thousands. When he raised his arms, the air shimmered. Walls of energy rippled out, protecting entire streets from falling debris. The people called him Elder of the Light, though he never asked for the name. Children showed signs of the gift faster than anyone. One girl whispered to her brother, and her words were not carried by sound but by thought. A boy ran through fire without harm, laughing as flames bent around him like a cloak. The Empire had thought humans weak, but the children were proving otherwise. The awakening was not the same for everyone. Some bent metal and stone, others healed with a touch. Some spoke words that shook the ground. Others walked into the future and returned with visions. Each gift was different, but all carried the same weight. Humanity was no longer ordinary. The villagers gathered at night under the stars. They spoke of what was happening, of what it meant. Some feared the power, whispering, "Are we becoming monsters?" But others answered, "No, we are becoming what we were meant to be." Among them, the young woman who had stood against the Empire's commander felt her own gift grow stronger. She could bend fire and light, shaping them like rivers in her hands. When she walked among the people, they followed her not as a ruler, but as a symbol, a living proof that the human spirit had no chains. Yet, even as hope rose, shadows gathered. Scouts reported new fleets being built, greater and stronger than before. The Empire would return, and this time with everything it had. The people of Arcanes knew they could not remain hidden. The galaxy was watching them. Every word, every rumor spread faster than light. Some worlds prayed for humans to win. Others begged for them to fail, fearing what gods of flesh might bring. In secret caves, humans trained. They learned to control their gifts, to bend them with discipline. The old teacher spoke. Power without purpose is chaos. Power with purpose is destiny. The children listened, their eyes glowing softly. They understood this was not just survival, this was a new beginning. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, the young woman stood at the edge of the colony. She closed her eyes and felt the heartbeat of the planet. Every tree, every stone, every living being pulsed within her. Her voice was soft but steady. "We are no longer slaves," she said. "We are no longer forgotten." Her words carried across the stars, though no machines sent them. They were carried by the very fabric of the galaxy. In distant corners of space, alien leaders trembled as they heard her voice in their dreams. In hidden temples, ancient beings stirred, recognizing the signs. The awakening was not just on Arcanes. It was spreading. Across other human colonies, people began to feel the change. Small at first, a spark, a flicker, but soon it would be a storm. The Empire prepared for war, but deep down, their leaders knew the truth. They were not facing rebels or soldiers. They were facing something that could not be chained, something older, stronger, destined to rise. The awakening was not the end. It was the beginning, and in the silence of the stars, the galaxy held its breath, for humanity had stepped onto a path from which there was no return. The awakening of humanity spread like fire. On Arcanes, entire villages trained their gifts. Children moved stones with thought, healers closed wounds with a touch, warriors bent fire and metal. The galaxy whispered of miracles. But the Empire did not see miracles, it saw rebellion. The Senate chamber shook with arguments. Some called for peace, others for total destruction. The Emperor ended the debate with one order. "Crush them," he said, his voice cold. Not one fleet, not 5 fleets, but an armada was prepared. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, ships armed with planet-killer cannons, soldiers in the millions. It was more force than ever sent against any enemy in centuries. The Empire believed that overwhelming power would end this human threat before it spread further. The people of Arcanes watched the skies as strange shadows grew above them. The old teacher whispered, "They are here." The young woman who led them felt no fear, only resolve. "This is the test," she said, This is the moment we rise or we fall. The invasion began with thunder. Thousands of dropships rained down. The air shook with the roar of engines. Cities trembled, forests burned, mountains cracked under the force of bombardment. The Empire came with fire, with machines, with arrogance. But the humans stood. When the first wave of soldiers landed, they charged with plasma rifles, shields, and armored walkers. But the ground itself rose against them. Walls of stone erupted, swallowing entire squads. Bolts of energy froze mid-air, then shattered like glass. Walkers collapsed as unseen hands crushed them like toys. Above the planet, dreadnoughts unleashed their cannons. Beams of light tore through the atmosphere. But humans lifted their arms, and the sky itself bent. Flames twisted, storms formed, lightning cracked across the void. The weapons of the Empire turned back on themselves. Entire fleets burned under their own fire. Still, the Empire did not retreat. Wave after wave of soldiers fell, ships exploded, machines crumbled. But the commanders ordered more. They believed no world could resist such force forever. Yet, every hour the humans grew stronger. Every clash awakened more of their gifts. Every wound healed. Every death seemed to spark new strength in the survivors. On the battlefield, the young woman walked among her people. She was a figure of fire and light, her hands shaping flames into blades that cut through metal. Her voice rose above the chaos. Stunt, this is our world, and no empire will take it from us. Her words filled the hearts of the villagers. Fear turned to courage, and courage turned to victory. The Empire tried new tactics, gas, machines, sonic weapons. But nothing worked. One boy walked into the cloud of poison and breathed without harm. Another stood before the sonic wave and shattered it with a scream of his own. The commanders of the Empire watched in horror. Every weapon they trusted turned useless. Every soldier they sent became a sacrifice to a hopeless war. Far above, the Emperor received the first reports. Dreadnoughts destroyed, legions lost, weapons failing. He clenched his fists in rage. How can they resist us? He demanded. But the truth was already clear. This was not resistance. This was transformation. Humans were no longer fighting like mortals. They were fighting like gods. The battle raged for days, fire and thunder across land and sky. But the outcome was already written. The Empire had struck with all its might. And still Arcani stood. Broken cities, scorched fields, but unbowed people. The humans did not kneel. They did not surrender. Instead, they looked to the stars with burning eyes. Knowing the war was only beginning, the Empire had struck back. But in doing so, it had revealed the truth to the galaxy. No chain, no fleet, no throne could stop what was rising. The age of weakness was gone. The age of humanity had begun. The fires of Arcanis still burned. The skies were filled with smoke, the land scarred by battle. But the humans were still standing, against fleets, against armies, against the weight of an empire. They had not fallen. The Empire's commanders could not understand. Every weapon had failed. Every strategy was broken. They threw legions into the fire, only to watch them vanish. It was no longer war. It was humiliation. In the Senate chamber, panic grew. Reports arrived one after another. Dreadnoughts destroyed. Cities lost. Legions wiped out. The rulers argued, their voices trembling. One shouted, "If we cannot crush them now, we will never stop them later." Another whispered, "Perhaps we already cannot stop them at all." While the Empire drowned in fear, something new was happening on Arcanis. Among the chaos, a leader began to rise. Not chosen by vote, not crowned by tradition, but lifted by the will of the people. The young woman who bent fire and light walked through the ruins. Where she passed, survivors gathered. The wounded reached for her. The broken stood again. Her voice carried like a flame in the night. "We are not alone. We are one." And the people believed. They began to call her the Ascendant, not just for her power, but for her spirit. She did not fight only with strength. She fought with wisdom, with compassion, with vision. She showed the people that their gifts were not weapons of destruction. They were tools of destiny. Under her guidance, the humans changed their struggle. No longer scattered, no longer chaotic. They trained together, powers woven into harmony. One bent stone into walls, while another lit the skies with fire. Healers moved across the battlefield, turning despair into hope. Children carried messages without words. The people became not just strong, but united. For the first time in history, humanity was more than survivors. They were a force, a storm that moved as one. The Empire sent one last desperate strike, a weapon older than memory, forged in the dark days of forgotten wars. A sun killer, built to burn entire worlds in seconds. The dread machine drifted into orbit, its cannons glowing like a second star. The commanders whispered, "This will end them." But the Ascendant stepped forward. She raised her arms, and the people gathered with her. Together, they became a single voice, a single heartbeat. The weapon fired, light brighter than the sun falling upon the planet. Yet the humans did not burn. They stood beneath the storm and bent it back. The beam cracked, shattered, and turned against the machine that made it. The sun killer broke apart in silence, scattering into dust across the sky. The galaxy watched in awe. Signals from Arcanes spread across every world. Images of humans bending fire and storm. Images of fleets crumbling under invisible hands. And at the center, the figure of the Ascendant, standing tall, her eyes blazing with light. On distant worlds, slaves whispered of freedom. Soldiers questioned their orders. Even rulers felt doubt. The idea had become unshakable. The Empire was not eternal. It could fall. The turning point was here, the day when humans proved they were not just fighting for survival. They were shaping a new destiny. And in the silence after the great battle, one truth echoed across the stars. The age of the Empire was fading. The age of humanity was rising. The war was over, but the echoes of battle still lingered in the air. Arcanes, once a forgotten colony, now stood as the heart of the storm. The fields were scarred, the cities broken, yet the people did not bow their heads. For in their eyes burned something brighter than fire, hope. The Empire's fleets were shattered, its soldiers defeated. No decree from the Senate could erase what had happened. The galaxy had seen it, every world, every ruler, every slave. They had watched humans stand against an empire and win. Across the stars, whispers turned to songs. The humans have risen, they said. They're no longer weak, they're no longer bound. Even on worlds far from Arcanes, people felt a spark inside them. A spark that whispered, change is coming. On Arcanes, the Ascendant walked among her people. She was no queen, no emperor, no tyrant. She was a guide, a symbol of what they could become. When she spoke, her words carried more weight than any throne. Power is not for conquest, she said. Power is for purpose. Her people listened and they believed. The old teacher, now called Elder of the Light, stood at her side. He told the children, your gifts are not curses, they are seeds. What you grow from them will shape the galaxy. The children nodded, their glowing eyes filled with wonder. The Empire tried to hide its defeat, but its lies fell apart like crumbling stone. Senators argued, worlds threatened rebellion. Some systems even whispered of leaving the Empire to join humanity. Fear had turned to doubt, and doubt was more dangerous than any fleet. For the first time, the galaxy no longer looked to the throne for power. It looked to Arcanes, to the humans who had become something greater. But victory did not bring only peace. With power came questions. Would humanity rule with kindness or fall into the same arrogance as the Empire? Would they bring freedom or build a new chain of their own? The Ascendant herself wondered. She felt the weight of destiny heavy on her shoulders. She whispered to the Elder, what if we fail? He answered with calm eyes. Then we rise again, for failure cannot end those who refuse to kneel. The new dawn was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something vast and unknown. The galaxy trembled at the thought. Humans, once mocked, now walked like gods. And gods always changed the worlds around them. One evening, as the twin moons rose above Arcanes, the people gathered. Fires lit the night. Voices sang in unison. They sang not of war, but of freedom. Not of conquest, but of unity. The Ascendant stood before them, her face bathed in starlight. She raised her hand to the sky. "This is not the end," she declared. "This is the dawn of humanity, and the galaxy will never be the same." Far beyond, in the dark edges of space, ancient watchers stirred. They whispered to one another in voices older than stars. "The humans have awakened," they said. "They will rise higher still, but will they remain as guardians or fall as tyrants?" The question drifted into the cosmos, unanswered, for destiny was not yet written. But one truth was clear to every world, every ruler, every slave. The empire had fallen from its throne, and in its place, humanity had risen. The new dawn had come, and the story of man, godlike and unyielding, had only just begun.